Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Authors on the Air. I'm your host, James Latwell. We're part of the Authors on the Air Global Radio Network. And with us today, we've got a historical author, and that's Juliet Grames. She's the author of Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. And it's a historical piece that, it's really immersive. And we'll talk a little bit about how you got into that. But welcome, Juliet. It's good to see you.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here. Now, for folks that don't know Juliet, she's an accomplished best-selling author. She's earned the Ellery Queen Award for publishing excellence by Mystery Writers of America. So she's not a new face in this scene at all. But what she's brought us today is just this richly textured historical novel that it's steeped in culture, but at its heart, there's a search for the truth in her book here, The Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. So could you tell folks a little bit about the story, about what's going on in your book?
Yeah, certainly. So it's set 1960 in southern Italy, the absolute toe of the boot, which happens to be the region that my grandmother is from. I am an Italian American, and I'm very passionate about writing about Italy's history and immigration stories. And so in this story, 1960, a 27-year-old American woman named Francesca Loftfield is living and working in this very remote mountain village so she's a charity agent, and she's supposed to be opening a charity nursery school. That's her mandate. And the village of Santa Chionia has no running water, no road, no electricity, none of those things yet. So her job is difficult. And then there's a catastrophic flood that knocks down the village post office and reveals a human skeleton. So this sort of launches her on a very ill-advised investigation into who the owner of these remains could possibly be. Because as she's getting to know the villagers, she's learning that a number of immigrant men have sailed away to America and then sort of never been heard from again. So lots of men go missing in this village. Maybe she should ask around and see if she can figure out why. Maybe she should not do that, but she has a lot to learn.
No, that sets it up very nicely. And you touched on it. It's set in the 1960s. It's kind of a really unique time in our culture in America, but also in Europe. And Francesca is just kind of plopped in this environment, and that clash of cultures was really kind of fun to read about because she's a fish out of water, and she's cut off in this very strange place to her. And how did you kind of design that setup for her, because it really kept us engaged?
Well, believe it or not, so Francesca Loftfield is a fictitious character I made up, but she's inspired by a real person. There was an American woman named Anne Cornelison, Guggenheim Fellow, memoirist and novelist, who lived and worked in Italy, in southern Italy, for 20 years, starting in 1954, working for the organization Save the Children. And that's what she did. She went into impoverished villages and she opened nursery schools. And her works were so important to me as I was researching my first book, also a historical set in southern Italy. And I reread them so many times for the details, but I also became enamored of this idea, here's a woman, total outsider, with access to all of the sensitive information in this village, censuses, property records. Who better to have to step into the role of, detective if there were to be some kind of murder case? But also southern Italy. This is the land my grandmother was born in. I feel like I'm allowed to say this. Riddled with endemic organized crime. A lot of us Italian Americans, we came here, we tried to shed where we came from and those associations because they are so entrenched. And there was a lot of natural historic drama to create a true crime story. Like I said, it is fictitious. The character is fictitious. The crimes themselves in the book are fictitious, but there's nothing that I made up. So it's all drawn from research.
Yeah, and it makes for a really rich story because that clash of cultures that you put Francesca in, she's just experiencing all this for the first time, and her reactions to it I thought were really fun to read along with. Now, her, she's a great character. All your characters in the book are I think from an author's perspective, I'm very jealous because you did such a wonderful job. There are no secondary characters in your book. They're all there, fully formed, and you can just kind of walk around this village and feel them as you're talking. How did you go about? She's based on a real person, but what did you do to get Francesca to come alive like that on the page? Because that's
Oh
something we don't see.
my gosh. Well, I worked on this book for 7 years. Thank you for saying that. There is absolutely no higher praise I could imagine. But it started with research for me. It started with true stories I was pulling from books I was reading and interviews I was conducting, and these like glistening tidbits I knew I wanted to put into the plot. Um, so kind of backward there. So then when I knew I had the story I wanted to tell, I needed characters strong enough to be able to bring you into this very foreign world and make you want to stay there. And that's really the hardest part. So I labored over it a lot. I wrote, before I started writing, I did a lot of free writing, character development. I
Mm.
create a Bible, a world Bible for every book that I write. In the case of this book, it was over 200,000 words of background information about all of the characters, how they related to one another, who had married whom, who liked what, who had what accident when they were 8 years old. And so I think I didn't really feel the authority to sit down and write the narrative text as it is until I was so thoroughly steeped in the personages that I could just sit down and write, and I knew where I was going. But I spent
Yeah,
a lot of time on that,
I
years.
mean that you must have. I mean, because it's so rich, and I read a lot of different genres and historicals when I pick them up. Sometimes I find myself getting just overloaded with this background of history of the place and the people and all that kind of stuff. You've managed to give us that, but through Francesca's story and the search for who these bones belong to. Um, so you're getting this rich immersive experience, but it's not being thrown in your face. And I really appreciated that because it kind of keeps me in the story, and I learned a lot through this. Like the issue about Calabria being really cut off from the Italian government and just kind of forcing them out of their ancestral homes.
Mhm.
And if I read in the author's notes, that's one of the things that kind of propelled you on this journey was kind of a search for an abandoned
Yeah.
ancestral home of yours.
It's true. There's so many ghost towns in the south of Italy, and some of it is incidental. This is a very poor and neglected, modern parlance, I would say it's a marginalized region. And so when mass immigration started in the early 20th century, it was abandoned. 50 to 75% of population in some towns just left. But there's also a less incidental component where the government just decided not to invest in these towns and bullied people or inspired people to leave en masse. And in the book, I called these forced depopulations because some of them were voted. There were referendums voted by the towns. Some of them were government, withdrawing all funding for development or for, disaster relief, just to sort of get people to give up on these ancestral homes and go
Mm.
to a place where they could be more easily managed. And I think we all know that forced population movements of people away from their ancestral homes always works out for the best, right? It's like, but this was this development wisdom in the mid 20th century,
Yeah.
to move people, and it left these gaping power vacuums that allowed the mob to move right in. And I just don't know that we would have the mafia conundrum we have now if there had been more investment into building and restoring towns instead of forcibly displacing people.
Yeah, yeah, I completely agree. The town itself, you mentioned it's fictional, and I'm almost kind of sad to hear that because um, it seems so vibrant, and you could smell the place as you're walking through it. Um, how much of that mirrored your ancestral home that you were researching?
Well, so my grandmother was from a mountain village. And I had spent quite a bit of time there when I was researching my first novel, which is largely set in that village. And while I was doing that research, I became very obsessed with the part of Calabria that this book is set in, the Aspromonte. So the Aspromonte is the mountain range at the very tip of the boot by Sicily. And Aspro Monte alone. Aspro is the Greek word for white, and monte is the Italian word for mountain. So it goes, I mean, it's just symbolic of what this area is. It's
Yeah.
this amalgam of classical and Byzantine Greek and Italian cultures mushed together. You have villages next to each other where one will be Italian speaking, one will be Greek speaking. And to this day, there are still Greek speakers there, with their amazing traditions and from these very isolated villages, a very different way of life that even in living memory, it was so separate from the mainstream. And I was lucky when I spent time there. I've met a number of people, octogenarians, nonagenarians, who let me interview them, who talked about their memories of this time and place, native Greco speakers who do speak this Greek dialect / language. And yeah, it was really, really cool. So I tried to make Santa Chionia, like I said, fictitious, but it's really an amalgam of 3 towns whose histories and languages and peoples and religious rites I borrowed from to create this little microculture right amongst them. So yeah, it was very fun. My love of speculative fiction and world building coming into my other love for crime fiction.
I love it. That's great. Now, in this town, we find a lot of, secrecy and this, basically a shroud of silence, among the population, things you just don't talk about. And Francesca's thrown in the middle of that, as this outsider that maybe she's the one that we can talk to about this. What is it about secrets like that are just so powerful uh, motivators?
One thing that's interesting, I'm only going to talk about Calabria right now because this is the
Mm.
area that I have specialized in researching for the last 10 years. But I think what I'm about to say can apply to a lot of places and a lot of microcultures. But what happens is when you have a marginalized group of people in an area where the established state structures don't protect them, you will have other protectors who step into the power vacuum. And this is when you were looking at Sicilian mob media, we talk about omerta and how you're always staying silent at all costs. And that's a concept in Calabrian mafia culture as well, that you don't talk. But you especially don't talk to the police, because the police are only antagonists in your life. And in this area in particular, people up in the mountains, people were hereditary goat herds. That was all they had. They
Mm.
didn't have cash money. So I have a friend who's 99 years old. So she was born in 1925, and she told me she first handled money when she was 30, so 1955. And it
Wow.
was when her husband was sick, so she had to go to the neighboring village to buy him medicine from the pharmacist. So this is like living memory. People were still working in kind in these like post-feudal structures. Peasants were really taken advantage of by people who owned land, and no one was paying taxes because no one had money. And so the Italian government tried to step in, and they tried to, impose things, especially in the 20s. They tried to impose tax payments on all people. They tried to impose environmental protection uh, rules so that they could have more control over the Italian territory in general. So the cross section of these sort of federal laws that didn't take people into account, what people's needs were. Goat herding, they started taxing the goat herds 1 lira per goat head, and these are people who don't have money. So
Yeah.
instantly, this entire population was made into outlaws. They had a choice to either kill their goats and eat them and not have income, or to keep being goat herders, but to be operating illegally because they couldn't pay the taxes on them. So suddenly you're hiding from the cops just to do your job that you've been doing for 1,000 years, which also creates this animosity toward the state, and also this sort of attitude of cleverness. We call it furba, you know, when you take pride in tricking the authorities and working around them, because the authorities are just antagonists, right? They're just oppressing you. So it's, you understand where the secrecy comes from. If you let any information out, that information can be used to harm you. So that's why family is so sacred. Secrets of a family are so sacred. And in a village like this, like many of these villages, everyone is family because of the intermarriages. So it's sort of your village against the rest of the world. And that's great in some ways for a sense of community and camaraderie, but it's also really dangerous if you do have a bad actor or an interloper who steps into the
Mhm.
power vacuum and takes over. Um, a lot of drama.
True. Now, putting a book like this together, I mean, there's so many moving parts. You've got this great cast of characters, you've got this rich history of place, and this time that you're in. What was the most challenging piece for you as an author to kind of tie all that together?
My gosh. It was so much fun though. Is the thing. I mean, it was hard. I know people know I'm a crime fiction editor. So I was very aware that I needed to pull out all the bells and whistles for the plot. I was like, I want this to be such a devious plot that anyone following along at home would think it would, be genuinely challenged by the puzzle mystery, and also maybe feel inspired to try to solve it alongside Francesca. And those are tricky. I've had the privilege of working with masters of the puzzle mystery like Peter Lovesey. I've gotten to interview him about his MO, as it were. And I mean, I hold that practice in the very highest esteem, and it was a lot of work, but it was so much fun. Um, it was, yeah, I can't, I mean, I love this genre so much because there's fun around all the darkness.
There is, and you touched on it, and it was something I was going to ask you about. I mean, yeah, I mean, you're an editor, and you like we mentioned at the outset, you've been recognized with the Ellery Queen Award as this figure in publishing. What kind of additional pressure did that put on you as an author to get this book out?
I mean, it was definitely, why do you think my first book was not a crime novel, Jim? It was like the people are watching. So yeah, I definitely took my time with this. Uh I edited the heck out of it. I kept working and reworking that plot structure. I just wanted it to be so perfect. It's because I felt like the stakes were pretty high. I felt like if I dropped any balls here, it'd be a hit to my credibility as an editor.
Well,
So
I think it's safe to say you juggled all the balls really well on this, and it really is a great book. It really
I
is.
have been very relieved by the review coverage. It was like you're just waiting for that, and you're like, okay,
Yeah.
people like it. Okay, that's good.
So we're gonna end up with something we call three quick hits, and I want to put you in Francesca's headspace, and I'll ask you
Okay,
three quick questions, and you just answer them from what Francesca would say.
okay.
What's Francesca's favorite cocktail? What does she like to drink?
She actually likes whiskey on a single rock. Yeah.
Okay.
She also likes grappa, but the whiskey makes her think of her student days, where she first learned to drink. She was actually in Oxford, England for a year before transferring to Ca' Foscati in Venice, and she had a big crush on this historian there, and drank whiskey with one rock, taught by him.
I love it. And that kind of echoes back to the 200,000 words of character
Oh,
background that you had
yeah,
on it.
try me.
Yeah. How about how about Francesca's music? What does she like to listen to?
So she actually really loves to listen to the Bach partitas. Um, their violin solo music. However, she doesn't listen to them often because her ex was a violinist, and he would play these all the time, which is how she fell in love with them. And then he's a little bit of a problematic character. He had some personality developments she didn't like so much, which is why she broke up with him. And so it's a little bit hard for her to listen to that. So, you know,
Get it. Yeah, that totally fits her. And then finally, what's her greatest fear? What is Francesca's greatest fear?
Francesca's greatest fear is living a meaningless life.
Mm, yeah, perfect. Folks, we've been talking with Juliet Grames, the author of Lost Boy of Santa Chionia. Chionia?
Chionia. Yep.
Chionia.
Yeah.
I knew by the time I'd ended this, we'd get that right. But if you're looking for a rich historical novel with really a twisty little mystery inside of it, that's your jam. So please pick it up. I think you'll enjoy it. Juliet, it's been great to talk to you.
Thank you so much, Jim.
You take care.